Only live in a way worthy of the gospel. Amen. Last month, I was on sabbatical. It was such a privilege to spend every moment of every day just drawing more closely into the divine mystery. I studied Hebrew language. I finished reading Karl Barth's Church Dogmatics, which I've been studying for 3 years. And in August, virtually every day, I went surfing and saw whales and dolphins and baby sea lion pups and seals. And for the first time in my life, I started really making food, starting with brown bread and bran muffins, and finally working my way up to kombucha, a kind of brewed sweet tea. Then on Monday morning, we had a terrible accident. I misjudged the amount of sugar in the watermelon juice that I was using to flavor the tea, and one of those sturdy, thick glass bottles exploded, showering our entire kitchen with shards of glass and watermelon juice. We're still discovering more glass as I speak right now. Now, for that batch, the rest of the bottles in that batch, I have to open them very slowly in the sink and almost leave them in there in the sink to fizz for about 20 minutes before they're ready to serve to other people. Similarly, the pressure in us these days as a society is feeling unbearable, like we're about to explode. First, all the problems with the COVID pandemic, our fears about our own health and worries about others. Then the economic disaster that continues to unfold before us. Our scales have fallen from before our eyes, and we see the problems that Americans have with race in a new way. And these last few weeks, with the wildfires in the West, and the hurricanes in the Gulf and the Atlantic seaboard, we are seeing the effects of climate change unfolding right before us. Now we have the election coming up, and the pressure is getting higher. But fortunately, Jesus is like the one who loosens the cap a little on our lives and releases the pressure so that we can be more completely children of God. The 19th century philosopher Hegel tried to find a bridge between the subjective and the objective, between our experience of facts and the way we add value and understand the world to have value. Jesus also understands that there's an irreducibly subjective element to our situation. He teaches us how to tell the stories of our lives to the world and to ourselves. He tries to help us see the world with new eyes. The parable that Jesus gives us today is so carefully crafted to show us who God is, who we are, and how we can be happy. He introduces us to the kingdom of heaven, which is drawing near. And the episode comes at a time of terrible tension in Jesus' own life. He's about to enter Jerusalem where he'll be killed by the authorities. And this is his last parable, his last story of what the kingdom of heaven is like. The word that he uses for a householder is despotes. And he means, he uses this word in another context when he writes, "Therefore, every scribe who has been trained for the kingdom of heaven is like the master of a household who brings out of his treasure what is new and what is old." Jesus has in mind a patient, kind, thoughtful, and generous householder. Now, it's hard to plan in advance when you need help harvesting grapes. It's a little bit like brewing kombucha, except without the explosions. The householder goes into the vineyard, tastes the grape to see what the sugar content is like, and then knows how many laborers he's going to need for help that day. And so in our story, the householder goes to the market to hire laborers at dawn, 9, noon, 3, and 5. And with the first group, he agrees to pay the usual daily wage. Then, at the end of the day, he pays all the workers, whether they got there early or late, the same amount. And he pays them in reverse order from when they started. So the people who worked the longest and who started first have to wait and see what everyone else is paid. Now, you almost can't help but feel sympathetic to the long workers They grumble that compared to those hired in the afternoon, they have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat. Last week, with the Apostle Peter, we imagined ourselves in the position of the forgiver rather than the one needing forgiveness. Today, we see ourselves as the workers who have been there the longest. And it makes sense, doesn't it? It is human nature to worship, to direct our lives according to a picture of what is valuable. The reformer John Calvin said that the human mind is a factory for making idols. We cannot help ourselves. If we're not worshiping the true God, then we'll make up a fake pretend God to take his place. One of the most powerful gods in our time and place is the God of meritocracy. We believe that what you get should be based entirely on how hard you work and how skilled you are. That view of life has tremendous power over how we understand the people around us and on our own happiness. National leaders like Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, Bill Clinton, Tony Blair, even Barack Obama espouse this in almost all the ways they talk. In 140 speeches, Barack Obama makes the statement, "You can make it if you try." And behind that is this idea of success being merited. Another example of the power of meritocracy comes from the scandal we had, the college admissions scandal we had last fall, where wealthy and prominent American families paid a consulting firm to cheat in order to get their children admitted to elite colleges. Even in our conversations about race, when we talk about white privilege, there's lurking behind it the idea that our goal should be to get rid of racism so that everyone can be on a level playing field. And then competition will determine who get the good things in society. It was only in 1958 that the British sociologist Michael Dunlop Young first coined the word meritocracy in his book, The Rise of Meritocracy. It was a satirical novel that was written as a history of our own time, written from an imagined future point, the year 2033. In that world, a merit-based system has created a new elite that has replaced the social classes of the 1950s, and at the same time created a deep sense of resentment in society, much like we sometimes hear about now. Young hated the way the word meritocracy came into modern language without the negative connotation he intended for it. My former professor at Harvard, Michael Sandel, has just written a book about meritocracy and the way that it subverts the greater good. He pointed out that there has never been anything like equality of opportunity. There's never been a level playing field. As a result, this way of thinking mostly just legitimates inequality. It merely provides a rationale for why some people have so much and others have nothing. Sandel also writes that it leads elites to look down at essential jobs in our society. He says that schools and colleges just exacerbate this dynamic. At Ivy League and other prestigious colleges, there are more students from families in the top 1% than in the bottom 50%. He suggests that after students in the admissions process have been screened so they meet minimum criteria, that after that, Harvard College should just admit students at random. Most of all, though, he feels that meritocracy damages us spiritually. He writes, "A powerful meritocracy banishes all sense of gift or grace. It diminishes our capacity to see ourselves as sharing a common fate. It leaves little room for the solidarity that can arise when we reflect on the contingency of our talents and fortunes." He writes that the inequality of esteem may be even more destructive than inequality of wealth. Now, this all brings us back to Jesus' ingenious story about the realm of God. This parable has been carefully designed to make a specific point, and that is that meritocracy story, the ingrained idea that hard work should be rewarded, that is simply not how God's kingdom operates. God provides us not with rewards, but with pure gift. And this should change how we experience everything. The story is so subtle and perfectly suited to our moment of public resentment. The early morning workers, they're not asking for more money. Strictly speaking, they're not even envious of the late workers in the sense that they don't want something that the late workers have. Instead, their grumbling is simply this. It is scorn, looking down at the others. They complain, "You have made them equal to us." They want the late workers to have less than they themselves have. They regard the late workers as less worthy. They hate the householder for erasing the hierarchy that their self-esteem and sense of identity comes from. Now, the householder will simply not accept this logic. Our translation has him say, "Are you envious because I'm jealous?" But what it really says in Greek is your eye evil? Getting back to my point about subjectivity, earlier in the gospel, Jesus says the eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is unhealthy, if your eye is evil, your whole body will be full of darkness. According to the householder, the problem was with how the early workers see. They received exactly what they expected to see for the day, but couldn't see that all of their friends received so much more than expected. They see the world in us versus them terms, rather than rejoicing in the we, which has just received such a fabulously generous windfall. Those first workers see competition and status in God's vineyard of abundance and generosity. A story about their superiority has dimmed their eyes, has dimmed the lamps of their eyes, so that they can only see rivals instead of comrades or friends. Even the householder's exorbitant generosity becomes the occasion for division and resentment, a chance to look down on their brothers. Jesus is not saying that hard work shouldn't be rewarded, but only that God's grace simply doesn't work that way. God's kingdom is based on generosity. Today, we celebrate Stewardship Sunday, the beginning of the year when we ask you to make your gift to Grace Cathedral. It is a practical way to experience what it means to be in God's kingdom, to leave behind that us versus them mentality, and to really be part of all humanity in receiving the gifts that God loves to bestow upon us. We can make our annual gift to this cathedral and be generous in a way that helps us see beyond the us versus them dynamic. I'm so very grateful for the way that Jesus loosens the cap on my bottled up and high pressure life. And for the way that he helps me to see the world in a way that invites joy, both in myself and in the people around me. Over time, I've noticed this, that I'm being changed by his gospel, by his presence. I'm not as concerned about who gets what or who's gotten more than me. It's much easier for me now to rejoice in what other people have. Don't let the sense of gift or grace be banished from your life. Fully share our common fate as human beings. Together, hopeful, strong. Be generous and rejoice in the generosity of our Father.